Good evening. Good evening. Glad to see all you guys here. I'm John Carter. Welcome. For those of you I don't know, this is Mr. Paul Muldoon, Mr. Steve Berkowitz, and we are very excited to be here tonight in celebration of this release of my father's previously unreleased poetry. Hopefully won't feedback, we'll see. Forever Words. So my father, of course, was a prolific writer, and all through his life, he continued to make poetry. He continued to write. He continued to follow his heart, and that was really what it was all about. And when it came to poetry, for him, throughout his life, he was always writing something. Now, when he passed away, within his drawers, within his desks, within the cabinets, within the notebooks, we found probably around 200 previously unreleased works. Now, this would entail fragments of songs. This would possibly be what was definitely a poem, or perhaps it was a song that never quite had a melody added to it. But within that amassment, there were maybe 40 or 50 that stood out as being true works of beauty and true works of genius. And so it became an inspiration quite some time back to see this book become a reality. I spoke with Mr. Berkowitz, who I've worked with for a long time. He was there with the folks at Sony for a while, but and we decided, hey, there is something beautiful here. We sat down and looked at the stuff. Mr. Berkowitz reached out to Mr. Muldoon, and Mr. Muldoon was in agreement with us that there was a story to be told about my father's of my father's unpublished works. So Forever Words. Why Forever Words? And we'll get to that later on. But my dad was many different things. He was a diverse person. He had many different aspects of his character. He was a man of great faith. There was definitely a darkness there within his makeup that was very much a part of his being. It is undeniable. However, I do not dwell in that. I do not carry that around with me on a regular basis. He had a great love for my mother. He had a great love for different people in his life, of course. And he was a very persistent, tenacious, driven man. And we're going to do a few readings back and forth and talk about this book. The Forever Words, and I'm going to read right off the bat. I wasn't planning on this until I came up. This is I'll Still Love You, which is undated. Thank you, Mr. Muldoon. One of these mornings, I'm going to rise up flying. One of these mornings, I'll sail away beyond the blue. I've got a promise that there's a better world ahead. I want you to know that when I go, I'll still love you. One of these mornings, when the trouble's over, one of these mornings, when all my suffering is through, I'll go out singing. It'll be a day to sing about. I guarantee for eternity, I'll still love you. I won't be a stranger when I get to heaven, 'cause you gave me heaven right here on earth. If I get rewarded with a mansion on a golden street, I want you to know, for what it's worth, I'll still love you. And I hear those words, and yes, they are poetry, but that is his speech. That's the way he talked to my mother. And I remember that when I look at those words. And so that's cherishing. Anyway, it's been a great trip, and I'm really grateful, Mr. Muldoon. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight, Mr. Berkowitz. And thank you for being a part of this book. Thank you I think you got a microphone there. Talk to the folks somewhere.
I do, but I think it might be useful actually to hear a little bit about how we went about this. Would that be appropriate?
Very good.
And I think actually at this point maybe Steve would say a word or two about that. I hear the clarion call.
I hear them honking.
It's a banshee.
Sure, Paul, thanks. I've been fortunate to work with John Carter on a number of Johnny Cash projects, and actually got to work with Johnny when he was here on this plane with us. And John Carter brought forth the 200 or so writings, which are letters, sermons, love letters, testimonials about friends, prayers, song lyrics, poems. I didn't know I was going to do this, but as far as I was concerned, the book came together when this little passage sunk in.
And
so-
yeah, this that you're going to read, it really sums it all up to me of about what this book is, why it's called Forever Words.
As we went through it, and you can see in the book the actual handwriting of Johnny, you tell me I must perish like the flowers that I cherish, nothing remaining of my name, nothing remembered of my fame. But the trees I planted still are young, and the songs I sang will still be sung. Beautiful words unto themselves, and then when you take who actually wrote them and the depth of feeling and understanding of past, present, and future, I went, man, he's talking about forever. And it became pretty clear that this was a book, and that at the same time I had traveled about, and I don't know if I've even told you this, my wife and I were in London, and we came out of the Tube in Crouch End, and at a rockabilly bar, there was a painting on a brick wall in their backyard of Johnny Cash's head and then a skeletal body under it. Go, they think he's a rebel. Mm-hmm. A couple of months later, like most of us, I was at a Cracker Barrel in Missouri, and
Were you at that one?
people were reaching for the Johnny Cash gospel collection in the racks, and I went, he's a man of God. Now, isn't this amazing that to some people he's a rebel or a man of God or both? And he speaks to everybody, and we quote him like it's the Bible, like it's, I'm going, God, he's already done this literary thing, hasn't he? But have we noticed that other than...
And it's within that exposure too of his frailties to me, that he's not afraid to stand up there and say, he wasn't afraid to say, I've fallen, I've made mistakes, that so many people, I believe, have connected to him on so many different walks of life, and he could sing cocaine blues, and have the crowd, rousted almost to riot, and then follow it up with Peace in the Valley, and have them, eating out of his hands. These contradictions, I believe, and this mystery is part of what draws so many people to him, because we can all find something, or so many people can find different things that they relate to in my dad. But when it comes down to it, having known the man, he was a simple person. He was a man of love. He was a man of promise. He had his shortcomings, but he was of the very soil from whence he came, and that's in the words, it's in the songs, and it's in the mystery. So it continues, and so what is the legacy of Johnny Cash? It's what we did. It's where we look, because there's so much there. There's so much beauty to be found, and it's all within this book, most certainly.
I was struck just listening to Steve reading those lines, and it occurred to me that is the kind of sentiment that could very easily go wrong. The trees that I planted, still are young. The songs I sang will still be sung. I mean, one can imagine those words coming through someone else or from someone else as being somewhat self-regarding. But I think, he has this extraordinary capacity for candor and for honesty, that one takes that, not in the way that one might look at someone saying that and say, is that in your mind? I think one takes them as being direct from the heart, exactly, and not at all self-regarding in some beautiful way.
Yeah, and it's also, when I read those words too, it's this was written, that's on the back of the book, the poem Forever was written, weeks before my father passed away. And it came from a notebook that was mostly full of letters that were written to my mother, even though she had gone on. And Dad would tell my mother in the letters how he missed her, how he wished that she was there. And there was a lot of forlorn sadness within those pages. There was a lot of loss. There was so much. There was hopelessness. And right in the midst of all of those letters was this poem. Right in the middle of it. And so just the fact, knowing where he was when he wrote that, and knowing that he could clearly see the goodness that could still continue, even in the face of his own mortality and infirmity and overwhelming sicknesses that were consuming his life and his body and soul, that he could, that the beauty was still there. And so that's what shines to me so much.
We should say a little bit about the process of getting this book into being. One of the things that I think we were all very conscious of was our responsibility to the memory of Johnny Cash and what he stands for. And we were all, I think, particularly keen to present him at nothing less than his very best. So while we had this rather significant amount of material, 200 pieces, we really went through it saying yay or nay. Is this good enough to be in? Is it not? And it was actually it was a very intense.
Yeah, it was an interesting roundtable there, wasn't it? Yeah.
An intensive conversation that took place in the vicinity of Nashville, Tennessee. Would you like to say a word or two about it?
Yeah, we're upstairs in his house, and
next to the pool table.
John Carter and I had read these a lot and put them in an order, and actually created 2 leather-bound books with a copy of the real writing, a scan on one side and the transcription on the other, and they kind of got numbered, and we went through them, and the process took quite a few months. What feels great? What really communicates Johnny Cash to me, to you, and out? And we both kind of made our marks. But then along the way, I had suggested Paul, because we're going to present a poetry book, and being a leading poet on this planet at this time, and quite a musical fellow as well, though you might not know that about him, I thought to ask him.
I'm just thinking about a leading poet on the planet at this time. Think about that.
Yes. Well, it's a good thing you're sitting down. Huh?
It is.
But fortunately, we presented the project to him, and he decided yes after reading it. And then we sat together for a day and had all kind of pre-made our suggestions of what would get picked for this book, and basically then said, okay, Paul, you're the editor.
What do you think, Paul? And then we
Do
did
your
exactly
thing.
what he said. No, we had our opinions for certain, but definitely, I mean, I think we turned to Mr. Muldoon because, because my father, I mean, so many people connect with him, and that's what this book's about. It's about where do we connect with him as humans. But thank you for your wisdom, Mr. Muldoon, and your knowledge.
Not at all. We should say something maybe about how there's one piece in particular that springs to mind that was edited a little bit more than
Spirit Writer?
Spirit Writer.
No, that's the one that I was thinking about singing a cappella.
Oh, would you like to do
You may
that later on?
now
Maybe?
or later? Why don't we do that later?
Well, we could have a little bit of it now and come back to it, perhaps.
Yeah, we can.
There's a lovely thing about leaving something and coming back. It's up to you.
No, go.
Yeah. So, I mean, for example, the way in which this is presented. Well, indeed, the book is presented, I'm reminded here, alphabetically, which I find very useful, particularly at a time like this. When one, can you see there was?
He said, "Do you need Post-it notes?" And I said, "No, we figured out how to make this work."
So we do it alphabetically. I'm a great believer in the alphabet, and I just see such great poems flying by here. But Spirit Writer, one of the glories of this book, which I hope you'll have the opportunity to think about, is that the text of a number of the pieces is presented there on the facing page. And actually, if you study this poem, the sequence of the verses has been modified somewhat. And there was a particular reason in this case why I suggested we do that, and it had to do with the fact that there is a plan along the way to record some of these pieces to have various musicians, songwriters come in and add to.
We're
or
about halfway through it, actually.
about halfway
Yeah.
through that project. So this particular one, there was a little bit of a sense of urgency about it. Somebody was coming in to record it, I think, the next day.
And what's interesting, too, Jamie Johnson.
Jamie Johnson. So I suggested that the sequence of the verses be changed, because I felt it really made more sense that it come in one particular sequence, which, really takes a little bit of nerve when one's dealing with an icon, and could easily be perceived as heretical. But we were working on the principle, and of course any fool can persuade himself or herself that he's working on a principle, that we were at the service of the song, just as Johnny Cash himself was at its service, that it's actually more important than him even, or us, and that we tried to find a way in which it would most effectively come into the world.
Something interesting, too, is that unbeknownst to Jamie Johnson, he made this, when he put the music to this lyric, he made the same edit as you did, Mr. Muldoon. So he switched the verses in the same way that you did without knowing that you had done so.
Which, suggests that, again, if one of the things about being a reader is that one is involved in the same process, or a listener, one is involved in the same process as the writer or the songwriter was involved in. And one actually gets so bound up in that one actually is capable, I think, in a modest way of attempting anyway to make some of the decisions that might have been made by the first writer. Well, we're going to hear I think we'll save it, we're going to hear a beautiful a cappella version of that. Oh, well, it's going to be gorgeous version of that. But what else? What might we talk about?
What's something else that's interesting, and that I was thinking about this earlier, that's a good point to make. My father, throughout his life, he would write and rewrite songs. There is one song in here that is an updated version, or a second version, to one of his older songs. He wrote a song in the late 1950s, I think it was 59, 60, called Don't Take Your Guns to Town. Now, this is a sort of a Western in which young Billy Joe is told by his mother, don't take your guns to town, but he does not heed her message, and he goes to town, and he goes to the saloon, and he winds up shot and dead on the floor because he took his gun to town. But my father in the 1980s did a rewrite of this, and you can take it however it's worth, but it's interesting how he did that. And so that poem is in here, and it is don't take your gun to town, and it's the singular. And I always thought this, I always loved this. But a young man of propriety found life to be a bore. Propriety, sorry. He had studied politics and law, psychology, and more. He felt cold and jaded overall and all around. On impulse, he picked up a gun in a sleazy part of town. But a lady who understood him said, don't let the hammer down, Joe. Leave the thing at home. No, don't take the gun to town. They kissed, and he said, please, don't underestimate your man. I can do and be and dare as anybody can. Sweetheart, there are people who need silencing, and so I shall avenge society of hypocritical Joe. So definitely I'll go and take my gun to town. He named a politician who had long been on his list, a singer and an actor, and others I won't miss. The preachers with their promises are plastic, bogus clowns. But a kind, sweet voice kept haunting him. Joe, don't take your gun to town. Do not draw the gun. Let God's peace rule the day then. Throw the gun away, Joe. Let this obsession go. The happy, cheering crowd, unaware, watched the motorcade move on. With a change of heart, Joe stood with his sweetheart alone. Then they walked to the river bridge, where midway he sat down. He dropped the gun, and the water made a laughing sound. The cold blue steel for killing settled in the mud deep below and never will be found. Thank God for the woman who went out into the night and quietly corrected this great wrong and made it right. With love she turned around a tragedy and sound. and heaven answered down, don't take your guns to town.
I hope that's read in Chicago tonight.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
I hope it's read in
not a
Chicago
joke.
and all around this country and all around this world.
But it's gone from the Western ballad that it started out to the 80s when he wrote it, and it feels extremely current, like completely.
Now, do we have a guns there at the end?
The gun, yeah, it's plural at
Yes.
the end. Yeah,
Yes.
So, but that's the only time in the writing that he wrote it as a plural.
Yes. And I think we decided in a case like that in that particular case, we obviously decided to hold on to the plural. And
In that last stanza.
yeah.
But the title was "Don't Take Your Gun to Town."
That's right.
Written that way. It was single,
That's right.
But the original was plural.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, it's powerful and poignant, and it's strong and it continues. There's so much here, Paul. Is there something that you love that you'd like to read?
Well, I think of the different aspects of on which he was able to draw, and one in particular that I think is a constant for him is the ballad tradition. And when I was thinking about the introduction for this, one of the things I discovered was that the name Cash was known in an earlier version or a different version as Cass, C-A-S-S, and that name is recorded in the Registrum de Dunfermline, i.e. the register of the people living in Dunfermline town. And those of you who are familiar with the ballad tradition will remember that that's the town in which Sir Patrick spends the subject of one of the great ballads. The king was in Dunfermline town. And that tradition, I think, comes down through the ballads of the Scottish and indeed the Irish people who moved over to this part of the world. And it's the tradition in which Johnny Cash, I think, perhaps the strongest component, I think, of his work. I mean, it's no accident that when I was a kid in Ireland, there was a song called 40 Shades of Green, and we just assumed at some level that Johnny Cash was an Irishman. And because we're very, we'll take in, we love to include, having been excluded so often ourselves. I saw a reference recently to, are you okay? Do you want some water?
Fine.
To Jonathan Swift, the English writer born in Ireland. So in any case, the way in which that tradition is extended in Johnny Cash, I think, is really quite remarkable. And there's a ballad here, which, thank you very much. Well, do you want to read a verse of it there?
Either way, yeah.
It's called The Dogs Are in the Woods. The dogs are in the woods.
The dogs are in the woods, and the hunting's looking good, and the raccoons on the hill, I can hear them trailing still.
Now he's on the other side, and he'll find a place to hide, but the dogs will hunt him down, and they'll catch him on the ground.
But the fur is going to fly, and a hound is going to cry, and we may not know tonight who will finally win the fight.
But the dogs are in the wood, and the hunting's looking good. The fire is burning low. We wet it down and go, and we make a beeline to the howling in the pine.
It's too far to see, but they're barking up a tree. Then we hear them on the run, and the night has just begun.
But the fur is going to fly, and a hound is going to cry, and we may not know tonight who will finally win the fight.
But the dogs are in the woods, and the hunting's looking good. I remember hunting with my father in the early 80s, and it may have been, in the late 70s also. So he was experienced to chasing raccoons through the woods in the middle of the night. So it comes from real experience.
Yeah. Well, that was in the era before satellite TV, I guess. You had to have something to do in the middle of the night.
It's much more exciting. It's not, yeah.
One of the things I love about this is how, a phrase like the fur is going to fly, which or they're barking up a tree. I mean, these are phrases which are what one could easily think of them as being cliched, that one's seen them one time too many, and yet they're actually given a new lease of life by being, precise descriptions of what's going on. They are barking up the tree, and it's almost as if that familiar thing has rejuvenated. And then, I mean, the wonderful description there of wetting the fire.
How would you go about wetting a fire?
Well, when you're going to, isn't it, that's what it says? Am I missing that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to dampen the fire. It may, in fact, be where the notion of damping a fire comes from. You to keep the fire in overnight. That was a country tradition, which probably came certainly from Scotland and Ireland to this part of the world. There were houses in Ireland, probably may still be one or two, where the fire had not gone out for hundreds of years. They kept it in. You wet the ashes.
That's something about my father too that I don't think as many people are as aware of, is that he truly was a scholar, and the ballads and the poems that you speak of, he studied them, he read them, and if he would create something like this, he was making it his own with his own voice. But he was studied in the learning, of the process of how to write said ballad, but it wasn't only ballads. It was biblical studies. I mean, my father, his copy of Flavius Josephus, it was written not long after the time of Christ, was annotated and worn. I mean, he truly read these books, and he was a scholar. Yeah.
There's two good examples of the scholarly pursuit in a long form here, both in Job and Tecumseh, two subjects that he wrote extensively and studied about.
And he would also, in the same stance that he wrote Job from a scholarly pursuit, he also wrote it as a form of therapy for himself, because when he wrote Job, of course, Job in the Old Testament was tortured and full of misery and pain and lost family and lost land and lost everything. And my father, when he wrote Job, was suffering from a broken jaw, and he was in constant physical misery every day. And so one way of understanding how to bear this pain was to study Job. And so, there's a catharsis within these words. And he had a great love for the Native American people, and he's studied, Tecumseh, and Panther in the Sky was one of his favorite books. He was also a man of great humor. And specifically in this book, one of my favorites is Don't Make a Movie About Me, which he wrote on Christmas Day, 1982. And if you look at that one on the second page, or the 3-page from the beginning, you can see the handwritten, and it is quite interesting. My friend Marty Stewart actually has this original, and he was nice enough to lend this for this book. But I love this. I got to read this.
Go for it.
If anybody made a movie out of my life, I wouldn't like it, but I'd watch it twice. If they halfway tried to do it right, there'd be 40 screenwriters working day and night. They'd need the research team from Uncle Sam and go from David Allan Coe to Billy Graham. It would run 10 days in Final Cut, and that would mean leaving out the gossip smut. And I do request for my children's sake, don't ever let them do a new remake The thing I'm saying is, don't you see? Don't make a movie about me. Even for TV, don't make a movie about me. Don't let him drag Old Hickory Lake, which is the lake that he lived beside in Hendersonville, Tennessee, for my telephones and bottles and roller skates. Down 40 feet in the Cumberland mud, there's a rusty old gun that once shed blood. Out 100 yards from my lakeside house, weighed down with a rock is a skirt and a blouse, a dozen pairs of boots that made a dozen corns, trumpets, trombones, harmonicas, and horns, and the tapes that I threw from the lakeside door, Silverstein and Christofferson, from the years before. Everything has a story that should be let be, so don't make a movie about me.
I'll make a little note there, if you don't mind my interrupting you. Shel Silverstein has a particular, I guess he's known for a particular line of business, but he also won the Grammy Award for Best Country Song of 1969 for A Boy Named Sue, which is not necessarily...
He certainly did.
And then there's David Allan Coe. You'll forgive me for putting a little academic gloss here. David Allan Coe, whose name was mentioned there, and he, I discovered, had the distinction of living in a hearse, which was parked outside Ryman Auditorium. Did you ever come across him yourself?
I did.
But he wasn't living in a hearse at the time?
But he typically was in that hearse.
Was he?
Yeah. Yeah, no, David Allan Coe was an interesting character. And another interesting note is my father, he did tell me, and this is so that he actually did throw quite a bit in the lake. So, including letters from certain famous people that he'd wrap up with weights and throw them in the lake because he didn't want anybody seeing that. Personal things, of course, and probably everything that he listed in here, he threw within that lake. I saw him walking up one time from the lake. I said, "What you been doing?" He said, "Oh, throwing things in again." But interesting too is that he did go on to really get the film made, the Walk the Line film. He had a lot to do with it getting going himself. He produced the beginning of it, working with one of the producers that.
But he did not see the film himself, did he?
No, he didn't.
He died.
But he and my mother, they wanted the movie made about their love affair, and they worked with James Keach, who was still one of the final producers when it did make it to the screen. So he saw one of the later versions of the script. So this is tongue-in-cheek, but I think he'd probably, part of him just as soon there not been a movie, but if they were going to do it, it better be about his love with my mom, you know.
Would this be a moment? Sorry, go ahead.
So, separate from the poet's point of view, when John Carter and I were just reading it all through at the beginning, one day it dawned on me, wow, this writing is like a parallel autobiography in poetic and song lyric form. And that was another aspect of it that really got me. I went, God, here it is again. Here's his whole life, and one foot in hell and one foot over the River Jordan, and the man that Johnny Cash is, again, by himself, telling you what it is. And that was another way that I enjoyed this work very much too, and was able to get closer to Johnny Cash by reading these words that I had never seen before. And when you go through the whole book, there's a whole bunch more about this man that I knew, accepted, than I had before. And I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, certainly. Perhaps at this point, we will open it up for questions. If anybody has any thoughts, comments, questions, or if you want to write down something and ask Mr. Muldoon, he'll answer you on Facebook. I'm just joking. If anybody's got any questions, please let us know. Yeah? I think it varies. I think there's certain things in here, and I believe Mr. Muldoon and Mr. Berkowitz will agree that were most certainly written as poems. For instance, "Forever" that was read earlier, and that there's others that most definitely were intended as nothing other than poems. But there are those in here that were, potentially had a melody with them, but he never recorded them. And then there's others that perhaps, hopefully, he was thinking maybe there would be a song someday, but that he didn't add a melody. But the one that I just read, that "Don't Make a Movie About Me," that's a poem, but you could probably put it to music. But there are others that my
is
song is,
Yeah. Is it a bit busy to be a song? Is there too much going on in that, do you think? Don't make a movie out of me, or
Yeah, I think it'd do better as a recitation,
Yeah.
probably, if there was something.
Uh-huh.
But yeah.
Whereas something like California Poem
Yeah.
is very decidedly, I think, a
I love
poem.
that. Yeah, read that.
There's trouble in the mountain, and the valley's full of smoke. There's crying on the mountain, and again the same heart broke. The lights are on past midnight, the curtains closed all day. There's trouble on the mountain, the valley people say. Which, I can't, one can imagine that being the beginning of a song, but it's a full picture, yeah.
It says it all. Begs,
Yeah,
so
and
much.
simultaneously, just to refer to the question again, clearly Tecumseh and Job are a different type of analysis that don't seem like they were going to be songs. They were the man's thoughts and analysis, and what were they for?
But he
other
wrote,
than his
he
exercise?
wrote a lot of like what he called talking blues, and that's, you could even look at one of those as being like a talking blues song. So I mean, it's really, to me, whether they're poems or whether they're songs or whether they're whatever, it's like the poet. If it touches you, if it touches your heart, if it touches you deeply inside, then to me that's poetry. And it may have music with it, it may have melody, but that's just my opinion.
I agree with that. It's I don't think there's a great future in trying to adjudicate as to which is which and what's what. And the minute one begins to lay down laws about that, something comes in and says, "Hey, look at me. Where do I fit in?" So it's a mistake, I think. We have them, and we have them in our heads and in our hearts, I think.
Anybody?
Don't Take Your Gun to Town was a rewrite of the song. Are there any more like that were either rewrites or early incarnations of songs?
There are other versions. For instance, "The Man Comes Around." I have a few alternate lyric sheets. For my father, with that instance, though, the first written lyric that is the recorded version of "The Man Comes Around," that's on American 4, same record that Hurt is on, is what wound up being the final version on the record, even though he recorded various versions of it. So there is that. Within these handwritten things, he rewrote the lyrics out to a few songs, but I can't think of anything other. Can you think of any? I think that's
couldn't
the
think
only one
of any other existing
Yeah.
songs that we know that we found serious
that he
alt
really
versions
rewrote.
of.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I think it has to be said, it's worth mentioning that and this is the case with many literary texts, of course, as many of you will know, some of these pieces, let's call them, are drawn from several variants of the text. So
there's a
you
few of
take
those,
a bit from version A, and a bit from version B, and a bit from version C.
For instance, Job. There were 4 versions of Job, and they were very long. And so, thanks to Mr. Muldoon, we get the version that's in the book. But my father didn't have a cohesive version at the end of it. However, it was quite a work. You know what I'm saying? And so it's a blessing to share it with everybody. But therefore, and also we are looking at possibly an extended version of this book, which would maybe come out next year. We're talking about it. We'll see. But anyway, it would contain more of that. Yeah.
Don't Take Your Guns to Town. In fact, he wrote the middle version of it on the Junkie and the Juice album, where Billy Joe was a schoolboy who he was imploring not to take his guns.
You're exactly right. The moment you said that, I was like, the Junkie, the Juice Head, and me. Yeah.
It was evolving, and then
Yeah.
and then you get this.
There's only one other person in this world that I know would know that. That's good.
You should have been involved in this project.
Yeah, you should have. Yeah. Paul, Mark Stilper, who works with the Trust, also has tidbits of knowledge like that is far beyond my understanding of my father's work. Thank you for that. Yeah.
The project that you had mentioned earlier about different artists coming in and recording it, are you letting them do the music and the melody, or
Yes, and unless it was "Don't Take Your Guns to Town," we're not going to. But Spirit Rider, Jamie Johnson did it. You Never Knew My Mind, Chris Cornell from Soundgarden did it. Jewel did Body on Body, and
T-Bone Burnett has done
T-Bone
Jellicoe Coleman.
did Jellicoe Coleman.
Which is a fabulous
Yeah.
piece, by the way. It's brilliant.
Yeah, Brad Paisley did Gold All Over the Ground. So we're about halfway through, but we're taking our time with it.
Part of the idea was to have artists co-write a song with Johnny
With
Cash,
my dad,
with
yeah.
the lyrics done, so half of it's done.
And in
then they
essence,
should do-
also, they're writing with him at that period in his life. And when Brad wrote "Gold All Over the Ground," he was connecting with my father in 1967. The same way with Chris connecting with my father, "You Never Knew My Mind" during the same year, which focuses on my father's breakup with his wife Vivian, which is so deep and intense. So it's a free form thing, and there are really not that many rules. I'm letting these artists in essence write a song with my father.
But one thing you're not doing, I believe, is allowing them, or am I wrong in this, to write additional quote unquote lyrics,
Yeah.
or
And Jamie-
are they? What do you think?
Yeah, Jamie Johnson and I actually finished a second verse for a California poem. So, and it was an interesting process.
That's for the song, not in the book.
for the song, not in the book. We're not going to touch that.
Right.
but it was an interesting process in which we lined it up, subject matter with word use, and just tried to stick exactly with where he was.
So a bit of co-writing in that sense too.
Yeah.
That's part of a larger project.
Mhm. Hey, you had a question?
Yeah, your father was a man of so many dimensions.
Uh-huh.
Which poem really captures his essence to you personally?
I have to say it's Forever. I mean, because all the rest of it is just as real. The humor, the laughter, the faith in God, his love for my mother, all that's just as important. But what sticks is, to me, is his sense of resilience and tenacity that in the face of life's adversary at the end of his life, that he did not cease, that he continued. And he kept making music. He kept following his heart. So that's what sticks. That's what really sticks. And so I go straight to the heart. I don't go any other direction. And that's really what sticks.
One of the things that struck me about it is the variousness of the pieces in this book. One would imagine that they would be in a particular vein, and that they might even be a bit monotonous. That nothing could be further from the truth. There's a whole wide range of subject matter and styles.
From the Man in Black, which is interesting, is if you think of the song Man in Black, he said, "I would love to wear a rainbow every day." What is a rainbow of colors in here? And that's the truth, It really was. That's really exactly who he was. So that's what he lends to us with these words.
The circle is round in that the observation that so many different types of people count on him for the words and sort of phrases, "Oh yeah, I walked the line," and various things that he would say that have become expressions in our culture. Motorcycle guys, religious people, people in love, everybody. And then you read through this and go, "Oh, they are all diverse, aren't they?"
I think I see Peter walking up. Guys, we have really enjoyed being with you up here tonight. One more question? Anybody else got anything? If not, I'm going to try to sing. Okay, go ahead.
This lady has one.
What percentage of all of the writings that you went through ended up in here?
What, a quarter? Maybe? Maybe less than a quarter?
Fifth,
Yeah.
quarter to a
less-
fifth.
Yeah, quarter to a fifth.
It's
Fifth to a
well,
quarter.
everything that we went through may not be all that there is.
It may
either.
right, yeah, and it also, it's like, there are some that definitely weren't fitting, and there's other stuff that, by God, it'll never be published because just too private or just not right. But there's not much of that, but there are those things. So
The idea was to present a poetry book of black type on a white piece of paper and a concise, beautiful volume, and his music and life are going to go on. So the possibility that there's others at some other time exists.
anyway, I'll give it all I got here. And this is Spirit Rider with a melody by Jamie Johnson. On a moonbeam, there might come a spirit rider who'll be watching for a flickering in the gloom. He will put a feeler out for love and welcome, and he just might cast a shadow across your room. I will scent out every evidence of danger. I will taste the air around my sugar shack. And if my heart knows you won't treat it like a stranger, and if the fire is lit, I'll be riding back. Before you know it, you will see a spirit rider. Cut me off, babe, and I'll be gone. I will mount my hi-ho, and I will ride off, ma'am, and I'll go on and on and on and on and on. The lies you laid in one ear will blow out the other. Let the storm rage round me on my outward tack. And if I hear bluebirds, I won't go any farther. And if the sky gets clear back here, I'll be riding back. And I will ramble, drift and range, and you'll be walking around imaginary things upon the floor. Walking circles round the reasons that have vanished. You'll forget what doesn't matter anymore. You might get a glimpse of me off in the distance. If you cry out, I might hear you on the wind. And if the mountains echo your love to me, wave your heart, and I'll be riding back again. Thank you, Jamie Johnson.